So let us continue the discussion on remaining sections of PGBP. If you remember carefully, what we have discussed till today in PGBP is section 28, charging section 29, which deals with calculation of PGBP income, section 30 to 35, expenses which are allowed as deduction while computing PGBP income, section 36, expenses which are allowed as deduction while computing PGBP income. Now one more section is left which tells me the expenditures which are allowed as deduction, and that remaining section is section 37. So this is the last section. After this, my discussion on the topic that which are those expenses which are allowed as deduction will be over. So I will move then to next portion of my PGBP. So for the time being, let us start section 37. It is very easy, and let us start section 37. So let me share the screen with you. Is it visible? Is the screen visible? I assume that it is visible. If it is not visible, only then you inform. Otherwise, I am assuming that it is visible. So today the date is 22nd, I think.
23rd, sir.
23rd. 23rd November 2021. Now still the discussion is going on the chapter PGBP, and what we have covered. Section 28 we have covered, 29 we have covered, and as far as expenses are covered, we have covered expenses which are covered in 30 to 35, 36, and now I will start with section 37. Now in 30 to 35, what we have covered? 30, 31, 32, 35, 35 AD, 35D. We have covered these 6. In 36, how many we have covered? In 36, around 11 or 13. In 36, there were 13 expenditures. Some of the expenditures are not in our course, that is why I have not covered. So what I have covered for the timing with you is only these 19 expenditures I have covered, and let us assume that there are 11 to 12 more such expenditures which I have not covered because these are not in our course. So I have to consider what portions are in our course. I cannot cover the entire income tax act. Only those things will be covered which are in our course. Completion of this act cannot be done in 6 months or 7 months. So let us assume that there are 11 or 12 in numbers, those expenses which are allowed as deduction. Still maximum which these two sections can cover is only 30, or you can say 32, around whatever, 19 plus 12, 31. So the number is, maximum number can be 50, for example. Let us suppose that there are 50 expenses which are given by the name. Let us assume that there are 50 in number the expenses which are given by name. But do you think that a business is having only these 50 expenditures? A business can be having, in a business there can be having lakhs of expenditures. Only how many expenditures I am expecting on the rational basis assumption that maximum 50, suppose, are those expenses which are given by names from section 30 to 35 or in section 36. What about remaining expenses? What about remaining expenses whose number may be in lakhs? Number. Any expenditure can be business expenditure. You can give any name. Office expenditure, stationery expenses, printing expenses. There is no limit on the number of expenses which you can say that this expenditure is business expenditure or this expenditure is necessary for the purpose of doing business or profession. Now the question arises, what about the treatment of those expenses which are not written in the act by name? 37 comes as a remedy in these cases. 37 deals with those expenses, all those expenses which satisfy the following conditions. 37 deals with all those expenses which satisfies the following condition. That means any expenditure, if fulfill these conditions, will be allowed as a business expenditure as per section 37. It is precisely 37(1). It is 37 subsection 1. So this 37 does not talk about the name of those expenses. It says any expenditure which fulfills all the following conditions will be allowed as valid business expenditure. Condition number 1. That expenditure which you want to claim as deduction under section 37 subsection 1 must not be covered. Not covered under sections 30 to 36. Because if any expenditure is covered under these sections, then you don't come here. You read the conditions of those sections and take the decision accordingly. So first condition is your expenditure must not be covered in earlier sections. If it is covered in earlier sections, then you cannot apply this section. Go and read the conditions of that section. If you fulfill those conditions, you can claim the deduction, otherwise not. Second, it should not be a personal expenditure. Not to be a personal nature expenditure. Now suppose I am a businessman. I am a businessman and I availed some medical expenditure for my own health. I am a businessman. 50,000, for example, is the medical expenditure which I have written in the P&L account. Act says this 50,000 is not allowed as a valid expenditure because it is your personal expenditure. It has nothing to do with the business. So this is second condition of section 37 subsection 1. Any expenditure which you want to claim as deduction should not be a personal nature expenditure. It should not be a capital expenditure. Not to be a capital. That means only revenue nature expenses can be covered under 37(1). So it should not be a capital expenditure. Any expenditure which you want to claim here as deduction must be on business, must be related to business or profession. It must be related to your business or profession. And fifth, this expenditure must not be illegal or must not be prohibited by law. So every expenditure which you want to claim as deduction, if not covered under earlier sections 30 to 36, then must satisfy all these conditions. Any expenditure which satisfies these conditions can be allowed as deduction under section 37 subsection 1. Like I gave a simple example, office expenditure. Office expenditure. Suppose office expenditure 10 lakh is written, office expense, printing, stationery, etc. 10 lakh. Was this office expenditure covered in this category 30 to 35? No. Was this office expenditure covered in 36? No. Then does it mean that it is not a business expenditure? I cannot decide it. I need to first check section 37 subsection 1 and I will see that Is this office expenditure allowed as deduction under 37(1)? Is it covered under 3236? No. Is it personal? No. Is it capital? No. Is it related to business? Yes. Is it illegal? No. Then this office expenditure is fulfilling all the conditions of 37(1). I will show this office expenditure also on the debit side of P&L account as a valid expenditure as per the provisions of section 37(1). So 37 subsection 1 is a residuary section. 37 subsection 1 is a residuary section to claim the expenses as valid expense. Section 30 to 36 are having the expenses which are having their own identity. Those are prominent expenses, those are common expenses. But other than these 30 to 36 expenditures, there can still be valid expenses which are business expenses. So those will be allowed under section 37 subsection 1 provided they satisfy the conditions of 37 subsection 1. Please raise your hand if the concept is clear. In fact, there will be many expenses which will be allowed as deduction under section 37 subsection 1. One thing is written in this 37(1) by name. Advertisement in a brochure diary of a political party is not allowed. This is what which is written clearly. What is written in 37 is note. Any advertisement. Now political parties are also having their own magazines, own pamphlets, own newspapers, whatever. Any advertisement expense which you have incurred as a businessman and it is relating to publishing some information in the magazine or document of a political party, then that advertisement cannot be allowed as valid expense. Suppose you give advertisement as a businessman. Suppose I'm giving advertisement on television. I'm giving advertisement on television. That advertisement expense is a valid expenditure as per section 37(1). There is no problem. It is allowed as valid expenses. Suppose you are giving advertisement as a business. Suppose I am a dealer in electronic item. Suppose I have my shop. I am a dealer in electronic items. I am selling in my shop television, washing machines, fridge, and I have distributed pamphlets so many times. If you get newspaper daily, you can see pamphlets which will come along with the newspapers. So I distributed pamphlets. It is an advertisement expenditure for me. Suppose 5,000 is the cost of this pamphlet distribution through newspapers at different homes of nearby areas where my shop is situated. Now question is this expenditure valid expenses? Answer is yes. This advertisement expense is not covered in 30 to 35. It is not covered in 36, but it is covered in section 37 subsection 1. So it is allowed as valid expense. But the same advertisement, if as a businessman I have done in any newspaper, magazines, brochures, pamphlets of a political party, any political party, then this expenditure is specifically disallowed as a business expenditure. I cannot show this as a business expenditure. The same advertisement, if done in a political party documents, I cannot show this as a business expenditure. Is the discussion clear? If yes, please raise your hands. Okay, now with this, we have completed our first main hurdle in PGBP understanding, that all the expenses are now clear. So whatever you debit on the debit, whatever you show as debit on the debit side of P&L account as an expenditure on the debit side of P&L account, you must carefully see that that expenditure must pass the test of these three different categories, either 30 to 35 or 36 or 37. Only these expenditures can be shown on the debit side which passes the test of these three different categories of PGBP sections. Now I am moving to my next section where I told you that some expenditures which are covered under these categories might have to pass an additional test of different sections. Which are those different sections for additional test? Either it can be section 40 clause A sub clause 1, either it can be section 40 capital A, or it can be section 43B. Is this clear? Please raise your hand. Do you remember this point or not? Please raise your hand if you remember this this point which I have just told you. So one thing must be clear in your mind, that when you apply section 40 clause A, 40 capital A or 43B, you will apply those in respect to those expenses which have already passed the validity test of section 30 to 35 or 36 or 37. Only then they have reached at the next level of 40 clause A, 40 capital A or 43B. Any expenditure which has failed in the test, which is as per sections 30 to 35, 36 or 37, will never reach section 40 clause A, 40 capital A or 43B. If it is clear, please raise your hands. Okay, now let us continue the discussion. So I am starting now with my first. So I am using the word disallowed section. I will call this section 40 clause A as disallowed. It is a provision which is disallowed, which will disallow the expenditure. The expenditure which might have been allowed under earlier sections, but now 40 clause A has the capability to disallow that expenditure. So this section 40 clause A will override what has been allowed in earlier sections. So we will use the word as disallowed section 40 clause A. So what is 40 capital A? It will disallow some expenditures, and similarly 43B. So now the discussion I'm starting is with now the discussion which I'm starting is on section 40 clause A. Let us start it now. So before making you understand 40 clause A, I need to clear one structure in your mind. So now this is my next discussion. Section 40 clause A. So this covers some expenses which will not be allowed, or which will be disallowed, you can say. And one thing is sure, that all these expenses must have come here only by passing the test of 30 to 35, 36 and 37. If they have passed the test of these eligible sections, only then they will see the light of section 40 clause A. So technically it is this is a door, for example. So once an expenditure passes this door is of section 30 to 35, 36 or 37, then that has to face another door. This door can be of section 40 clause A, 40 capital A or 43B. Any expenditure which passes this door also, that expenditure can be shown on the debit side of P&L account. Any expenditure which has failed here, which has not passed this door, will never see the light of these three sections. By default in P&L account, you will not be able to debit that expenditure which has failed at my first stage. I hope the structure now is clear in your mind. And now let me start telling you that what happens basically. Now X is a businessman. Mr. X is a businessman, so he will compute PGBP income by preparing P&L account. Now Mr. X will purchase something. So when Mr. X will purchase something, he will give some payment also. So I'm giving you some examples. Suppose I have taken some expertise of X Limited, not X Limited. Let us assume that K Limited is a company. This is an engineering company. And Mr. K has availed some technical services. So this K Limited has given to this businessman some technical services, engineering, etc. Some technical services have been given. In return of that, can you tell me what K will give to K Limited? What K will give?
Sir, money.
Sorry. What X will give to X? What X will give to K Limited?
Fees for services.
So X will give fees for technical services. Now, is this fees my business expenditure if I am X? Is this fees my business expenditure?
Yes.
Yes. How? How is it my business expenditure? How?
If the technical services are availed for the purpose of business and profession, then the expenditure incurred is also business expenditure.
Under which section? Under which section it is allowed? I don't know. So leave it. But for your level, what you can assume, for your level only, was this fee for technical services covered in 30 to 35?
No, sir.
Was it covered in 36? No. So for your level, you can say that it can be allowed under section 37 because it is business nature expenditure. It is not illegal. It is not covered in 30 to 36. It is not my personal nature expenditure. It is related to the business of the assessee. It might be revenue nature expenditure. So any expenditure for your level, what you should think that if not covered in 30 to 35, 36, if it is covered in 37, it will be allowed. So for my level, I can say that I can write it as 2 fees for technical services. Till this point, suppose this fees is 8 lakh. Till this point, if there is no confusion in this example, please raise your hands. Now what happens? There is a concept of TDS. Now what is that TDS concept? What is that TDS concept? Now in this case, who is the person who is earning the income? Who is the person who is earning the income?
K Limited.
K Limited will show this fees for technical service as his income, as its income. Fees for technical services. K Limited. Now, K Limited will show this fees under which head? K Limited will show this fees under which head?
PGBP.
It can be PGBP or it can be what? Other sources we do not know. We do not know what is the actual business of K Limited. Point clear? K Limited will show it as either PGBP or other sources. That is none of our business for the time being. And this same amount has become an expenditure for whom? For whom it has become an expenditure? Mr. X. Now, when X is paying 8 lakh to whom? K Limited. When X is paying 8 lakh, on every payment TDS is not there. On every payment TDS is not there. TDS is what? That you deduct tax at source before making any payment to any party. So let us assume, it is my assumption, let us assume that this fee for technical services is such payment where the payer was under obligation to deduct tax at source before making payment to the person from whom he or she has received those services. Suppose, as per the provisions of the Act, X is under the obligation to deduct 10% tax. Suppose X is under the obligation to deduct 10% TDS before making this payment. So technically, what X was supposed to do in this case? That 80,000 X will deduct as tax at source and will deposit to whom? X will give this 80,000 to whom? Government of India. And 7,20,000 X will give to whom? To whom? K Limited. Is this point clear? Suppose, since TDS is not there in your course in detail, so let me tell you directly that suppose this payment is that every payment is not covered under TDS. I am assuming that this is the payment which is covered under TDS obligation, where the payer will deduct 10% tax and deposit that 10% tax with the government, and remaining X will give to X, this K Limited. Is this point clear? If yes, please raise your hands. Next point. Now, if this is clear, so I am asking a question. How much will be the income of K Limited? How much K Limited will show? 720 or 8 lakh? How much K Limited will show? 720 or 8 lakh? How much is the income of K Limited? 720 or 8 lakh?
Sir, 720.
Any
Sir,
other
8
answer?
lakh.
8 lakh. Income of K Limited is 8 lakh, not 720. 80,000 is the tax of K Limited, which K has paid indirectly through whom? Mr. X. Technically, A Limited will say that I have earned 8 lakh, on which K Limited will say that I have paid 80,000 to the government through whom? Through X. TDS has nothing to do with Mr. X in this case. Mr. X was only under an obligation to deduct this amount and directly pay to the government so that the government can trace these transactions through PAN numbers. That's it. Through TDS, government gets regular revenue because K Limited will file the return of income after 1 year, after 31st March. But amount this 80,000 government has received during the same year. So technically K Limited's income is 8 lakh. And let us assume that since it is a case of company, let me assume for simplicity purpose that 30% is the tax. If this is the tax, so K Limited will say that the tax payable is 2 lakh 40, and K Limited will say that I have already paid how much? 80,000. So he will get the benefit here. It will be 160. Now he will pay. I have ignored that surcharge, education cess, etc. For simplicity, I wanted to tell you the concept of TDS. That K Limited will say that my income is 8 lakh, 30% tax comes out to be 2 lakh 40. I have already paid 80,000, so I will pay now remaining 1 lakh 60. Is the situation from a K Limited point of view clear? If yes, raise the hands. Is the situation from K Limited's point of view is clear in your mind that what will happen with K Limited? Okay. But my discussion is not with K Limited. I am Mr. X. I just told you the concept that what will happen with K Limited, but in reality, I'm dealing with the expenditure. So for me as a businessman, I'm Mr. X. I am concerned about 8 lakh rupees, whether I can show this on the debit side of P&L account or not. This is the main question. I just showed you something extra that what will happen with K Limited. But let us forget now K Limited and let us come to Mr. X, which is relevant for us. Can Mr. X show 8 lakh on the debit side of P&L account? Yes, there is no issue. But 40 clause A is a barrier. 40 clause A gives you some conditions. 40 clause A says that 40 clause A simply says that, don't write anything, just understand it. If now this will give you some conditions, I will show you those conditions. There are some conditions. So many conditions, some relevant ones I'm not writing here. I'm writing only one condition. If TDS is applicable and you failed, you means Mr. X, you failed in deducting it. You failed in deducting it. Like in my example, how much payment X is making? Tell me how much payment X has to make? 8 lakh. Let us assume on this 8 lakh TDS is compulsory. How much TDS? 10%. So what my job was as X? I should have deducted 80,000. But what I did, I committed a mistake. I forgot to deduct 80,000 and I, without deducting TDS, made entire 8 lakh rupees. So in this case, section 40 clause A says that don't debit 8 lakh now. So when X will prepare P&L account, can X show 8 lakh here? No, because of section 40 clause A. If there is any payment which is subject to TDS and you failed in deducting TDS, then don't ask for this expenditure on the debit side of P&L account. That is why businessmen are very much concerned about the TDS provisions. They know that if they failed in deducting TDS, they will not be able to debit the entire expenditure. Entire 8 lakh will be disallowed. Or what? Or suppose you deducted it. So I failed in deducting. Let us assume that I deducted, but I failed in depositing it on time. But I failed in depositing it. So ultimately government has not got the revenue. You deducted it, you kept it with you. You didn't deposit it with the government. Then also government says you committed a fault. You failed in depositing it. You failed in depositing it till your due date of filing return of income. Till your due date of filing return of income under section 139(1). Now can you tell me what is the due date for an individual assessee? Do you remember what is the due date of Mr. X?
So 31st July 2021.
Yes, for the previous year 2021, the due date of Mr. X is 31st July 21. Now what I did, I deducted 80,000, but I have not deposited this 80,000 till 31st July 21. Then also government says you cannot debit 8 lakh rupees. This is the loss which is there in section 40 clause A. that all such payments, or I should not use the word all, the payments which are covered in section 40 clause A, if on those payments there is a TDS, and if you failed in deducting the TDS when you made the payment, or you deducted but you failed in depositing the TDS in the year in which you deducted, then indirectly the entire expenditure you cannot show on the debit side of P&L account. Please raise your hand if this clause A of section 40 is clear now. This is what section 40 clause A is. Now, there are so many provisions of TDS you are not supposed to learn. Let me show you the provisions of TDS. You are not supposed to learn on which payment there is a TDS or not. This examiner will tell you. At your level, you are not. We cannot expect you to learn the provisions of TDS, but let me show you the provisions of TDS in the Act. There are many payments on which there is a TDS.
Sir, for us, can we just write this one condition?
Which?
Sir, for us, for our level, can we just write this one condition now?
No, I will tell you all the conditions which are relevant.
Okay, sir.
That is not the condition basically. That is only one condition if you failed, etc. There are other conditions also. What type of payment should be there? Payment is made to whom? Like for the time being, I have only told you K Limited. But now I will tell you exactly that K Limited should be whom. So it depends upon where the payment is made. Where, if the payment is made within India or outside India. If the payment is made to a resident person, non-resident person. So the person who is receiving the payment, that person's residential status is also relevant technically. Point clear? For simplicity, I have told you only K Limited. In reality, now when I will show you the Act, I will show you that you need to check who is this K Limited. What is the status of this K Limited? Is this K Limited a resident or non-resident? Where the payment is made? Is it made within India or outside India? Only then. So 40 clause A comes with some conditions. Not only that the payment which is subject to TDS is covered under 40A. No, all such payments are not covered. It is necessary to see where the payment is made within India or outside India, and what is the status of the person to whom the payment is being made. Point clear or not? If yes, please raise your hands. That I will write now. Please raise your hand if you have understood that 40A shows you more conditions also to be fulfilled. So let me, before showing 40 clause A, let me show you the provisions of TDS. Starting from section 192. So there is a chapter in the Act, collection and recovery of tax. As you can see, chapter number 10, 5 and 17, collection and recovery of tax. This is TDS chapter. It starts from section 90 and you can see so many payments are covered. Payment of balance to employee, payment of salary, interest on security, dividend, interest other than security, lottery, horse race, contractors, payment of commission, payment of life insurance policy, sports person, NSS, commission, payment of rent, payment when you transfer any house property, payment of rent, etc. under agreement, fees for professional technical service, income, and there are so many payments which are covered. Income by way of etc. investment, security, interest, etc. 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 Long list of sections having some payments which are subject to TDS. That is not in our course. So in our course, examiner will tell you that this is the payment on which there is TDS. But at higher level, you have to check yourself is this payment covered under TDS or not? So I wanted to simply show you the provision of the relevant chapter of TDS. Now let me show you the language of the Act in section 40 clause A. It is technical little bit, but I will try to simplify it. As you can see, the heading of section 40, amount not deductible. That is why I also call it as disallowed section. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary in sections 30 to 38. That means it does not matter what section 30 to 38 says. The following amounts shall not be deducted in computing the income chargeable under the Act PGBP. Following expenditures I cannot deduct. I have discussed only 40 clause A. After this I will discuss 40 clause B also, but for the time being 40 clause A only. In case of any assessee, that means assessee can be an individual, firm, HUF, company, doesn't matter. Whosoever is the assessee. Clause 1. Any interest. Ignore this bracket. Royalty, fees for technical service, or any other sum chargeable under this Act. That means any income by another person, but for this assessee it's an expenditure. So this is income to another income for K Limited in my example, but as an assessee Mr. X it is an expenditure. So for me, any expenditure on account of interest, royalty, fee for technical service, or you can say anything chargeable under this Act which is payable outside India. That means when you are making the payment outside India, then those payments, or if within India you are making the payment, then only to whom? Only to a non-resident, not being a company. So it is technical basically. I'm not discussing it for the time being. It will become technical, or to a foreign company. This is technical. You need time to understand this paragraph B, this item B. You need time to understand it. That you can understand only when you continuously read the Act yourself. So I will simplify this entire for you. On which tax is deductible at source under chapter 17B. I just showed you chapter 17, which deals with collection and recovery of tax. That means all the payments which are subject to TDS, and if these are made outside India, or if in India, then in India, within India if you are making the payment, every payment is not covered, only to who is a non-resident, etc. And such tax has not been deducted. This I have discussed, or deducted but not paid till due date of filing return of income under section 139(1). If this is the case, you cannot debit that expenditure in your P&L account. So this is a brief idea which I wanted to give you. This is clause A. Then we will be having clause 1A. We will be having clause 1B, 1C, clause 2, clause 2A, clause 2B. It's a lengthy section. Clause 3, clause 4, clause 5, and then 40 clause B starts. Clause BA starts. That's it. So now let us start simplifying this section. Try to find time to read 40 clause A. You will not be able to understand it. That is sure. You need time to understand it through the Act. But now, of course, I will tell you and you will understand it. But the real enjoyment comes when you start reading it and then you understand. So now, technically, now I am starting the discussion on section 40 clause A. Or to be more precise, I can say that I am discussing section 40 only, which tells you amount not deductible while computing PGBP income.
Excuse me, sir. Screen is
Yes.
not visible.
Not visible.
Sir, it's visible.
No, I was writing on my screen. So I think I forgot to share that notepad. Now it is visible, I think. I hope it is visible now. Amount not deductible while computing. I'm writing something and I think you can see this. Profits and gains of business and profession. Within this 40, there are two sections which are in our course. 40 clause A and 40 clause B. Both are in our course. The point is 40 clause B is applicable only to a partnership firm or only to a firm assessee. This 40B is not applicable to individual and HUF, but it is applicable to all assessees. That is why I am using the word 40 clause A, because 40 clause B is applicable for a partnership firm. 40 clause B. So for the time being, let us first discuss 40 clause A and then I will come to 40 clause B also. So what is 40 clause A? So now you start writing what I will tell you. So I will tell you this from my book, a simplified language. So 40 clause A, subclause 1. So this language you should write. It will help you in learning the concept. Any sum payable by an assessee on which tedious provisions are applicable. Those who are having my book, it is page 6.20. If you have this book, you can read it from here, otherwise you write it. Any sum payable by an assessee on which tedious provisions are applicable. So what are the conditions basically to make this section applicable? What conditions must be satisfied? It is technical but very interesting, because whenever you learn any difficult thing, always you will feel very happy that yes, you learned something extra. So what payment is made? Any interest that I have shown through the act, also royalty, fees for technical services, or any other sum payable by the assessee. So as a businessman, so this assessee is whom? The person who is preparing P&L account. So anything is payable by the assessee. Now second point is technical. Such sum is payable where? Now where you must be paying it. Not to whom, but where. Where means in India or outside India. Such sum is payable where. So I'm making two categories now. Where it is payable outside India or where in India. You can make the amount anywhere. Maybe you are making the payment outside India or in India, because you don't know from where you have received the services. So payment can be at any place in India or outside India. If it is made outside India, then it does not matter. It does not matter that the recipient who is receiving, like in my example, K Limited, is resident or recipient is non-resident, does not matter. It does not matter. I'm not concerned about who the recipient is, but what is the status of this recipient. Recipient might be resident or non-resident, does not matter. If the payment is made outside India, you are covered under 40 clause A subclause 1. So recipient can be, rather than is, I should use the word can be. To make you understand only, recipient can be in India or outside India, does not matter. Recipient can be a resident or can be a non-resident. It does not matter. The moment you make the payment outside India, you are covered under section 40 clause A subclause 1. If the payment is made in India, then it matters what is the status of recipient, residential status. If in India, then recipient is a foreign company. So if within India you are making the payment, then payment, if it is to a foreign company or a non-resident, or the recipient is a non-resident, NR. Now, if the recipient is a foreign company, can you tell me this foreign company, what can be the status of foreign company? Can you tell me what can be the status of a foreign company? If you remember the chapter residential status, how do you determine the status of a foreign company, residential status of foreign company?
Sir, non-resident, because it is registered outside India.
No. How do you determine?
Sir, it depends on the turnover. If the turnover is over 50 lakhs, then they're a resident.
No. How do you define the status?
Sir, place of effective management.
Yes. If place of effective management, how do you determine the status of foreign company? If place of effective management is where? Sanjay, where?
Sir, in India, then the foreign company will be treated as a resident.
Yes, if POEM is in India, then that foreign company will be known as resident. Otherwise, the foreign company is non-resident. So it is neither based on turnover, nor it is based on some other student was also telling something. I don't know that I have forgotten. But this is what the status. This is how you determine the status of a foreign company. So when the payment is made outside India, it does not matter who the recipient is. Irrelevant. You are covered under 40 clause A complications. When the payment is made in India, then you need to check who the recipient is. If the recipient is a foreign company, does not matter whether this foreign company is resident or non-resident, irrelevant. If the recipient is foreign company, does not matter resident or non-resident, you are covered under 40 clause A. If the recipient is non-resident, then you must be whom? Other than an Indian company. It is very technical, other than an Indian company. So if within, so entire problem arises when you are making the payment. So just come back to my same example where X is a businessman and K Limited is the recipient. Now if payment of that amount, what was the amount? 8 lakh, I think. If that payment is made outside India, it does not matter who this K Limited is. Resident, non-resident, irrelevant. You are covered under 40 clause A. If the payment is made in India, then it matters who this recipient is. Is K Limited a foreign company? If yes, then we will not check the status of this K Limited. You are covered under 40 clause A. If K Limited is not a foreign company, so rather than K Limited, let me assume that Mr. K has provided these services, or Mr. X has provided these services, not X, Mr. K. So I'm making now Mr. K as individual. As an individual also, Mr. K is having the expertise and he provided these services. So K will get the fees, Mr. K. So ignore K Limited now. A limited case is over now. Another case has come where now the recipient is Mr. K. In India, you are making the payment to K and Mr. K is non-resident. So yes, 40 clause A will be covered under this category. Because now this point says is if in India you are making the payment and if the recipient is a non-resident other than whom an Indian company. Why I am writing Indian company? Because Indian company is always what? What is the status of Indian company always?
So resident?
Yes, Indian company is always resident. Indian company is always resident in India. By default, Indian company is resident. So when I have written this word, recipient is a non-resident, I could not have written, I had to write this word, these words other than Indian company. So that the point is clear that if I'm saying that the recipient is non-resident, it cannot be an Indian company by default because Indian company is always resident. So technically, even if you skip this point, it will make the concept easy. Because if the recipient is Indian company, let us suppose if the recipient is Indian company, this K Limited, let us suppose K Limited is an Indian company, let us suppose K Limited, an Indian company, payment is made in Kanpur in India, payment is made in Kanpur in India. Can you tell me whether this payment will be covered under 40 clause A or not? Recipient
No,
is Indian company, payment is made in India. Will this payment be covered under 40 clause A?
No, sir.
No. Why? Because payment is made in India. Recipient is this recipient in non-resident? Answer is no, because Indian company is always resident. So even if I failed in deducting TDS, I can still claim the expense on the debit side. Even if I failed in deducting TDS, I can still claim the expense on the debit side. Under 40 clause A, only when you are covered under these circumstances, only when you fulfill these conditions, only then if you failed in deducting TDS, only then there will be complications that you cannot debit the expenses. But if you are making the payment in such a way, or you are making the payment to that person who is not at all covered under 40 clause A, then whether you deducted TDS or not, your business expenditure will be having no effect. You can still debit the expenditure. Of course, when you failed in deducting TDS, you will be penalized, but not under the provisions of PGBP, under the provisions which are separate. Where I will say that since you failed in fulfilling your TDS obligations, this much is penalty. But PGBP will be having no effect because of that. Again, read this second point. Sum is payable outside India. If outside India, then it does not matter that who or what is the status of recipient. If in India, then it matters what is the status of recipient. So who should be the recipient if you want to apply 40 clause A? Either the recipient should be a foreign company. This R or not and that doesn't matter. You simply remember it should be a foreign company. So don't get confused that foreign company is resident. Doesn't matter. If recipient is a foreign company, this 40 clause A becomes applicable if the payment is in India. Or if the recipient is non-resident, then also the payment becomes applicable in India. Other than these cases, if you are making the payment to anyone, then you cannot apply 40 clause A. Even if you failed in deducting TDS, there is no problem. Please raise your hand if something is clear. I cannot expect 100% clarity right now. I will discuss this with the help of numerical, but if something is clear, please raise your hand. That at least, yes, now you are getting a little bit idea about 40 clause A. It is technical, it will take time. What about others? कुछ लोग ऐसे हैं जो सिर्फ बैठे रहते हैं. They are so lazy that they don't have time even to raise the hands. Good manners are not taught. They must be learnt by yourself. Third condition. Third condition. Third condition. The assessee is required to deduct tax at source before making the payment of such sum to the recipient. This is third condition. That TDS must be applicable. So to be covered under 40 clause A, if there is any payment which is beyond TDS, then there is no need to check 40 clause A. For this 40 clause A, it is necessary that the payment which this assessee is making to the recipient, giving to the recipient, is covered under TDS. Whether that payment is having TDS or not, that you are not supposed to learn. For your level, examiner will tell you that this payment is subject to TDS. And last, can you tell me what is the last condition theoretically? What logically is the last condition? The assessee has not deducted the tax at source or deducted the tax at source but not deposited such tax. But not deposited such tax at source on or before the due date of furnishing return of income. Under section 139(1). This is my fourth condition. And if all the conditions are satisfied, now this is the main point. If all the conditions are satisfied, can you tell me what will happen logically? I will frame the language myself. Can you tell me what will happen if all the conditions are satisfied?
The amount
the
is not
assessee
allowed to be deducted.
Yes, the assessee who has made such payment cannot claim the deduction on account of payment of such sum. For such payment, he cannot claim the deduction on account of payment of such sum while computing the income under the head PGBP, profits and gains of business and profession. That's it. Please raise your hand if this point is clear. Please note it down and then you raise your hands. Note it down and please raise your hands. If you have noted down, then only raise the hands. I will move on when only you have noted down these points. So I think I should proceed now. This point is, you have noted down this point. So let us move forward. But don't you think that something wrong is being done with this businessman? Had you been the businessman, don't you think some injustice has been done to you? Can you think in the direction of a businessman? Had you been there in place of Mr. X, what wrong has been done with you? Can you tell me what wrong has been done with you because of this 40 clause A? What wrong has been done with you? You must think yourself as a businessman and place yourself in place of Mr. X. Had you been there, how you would have been pained because of 40 clause A?
So because
Yes.
of this section, as the expense would not be allowed to be deducted, my net profits would look inflated and I'd have to pay higher tax, even though I did make the payment or like did incur the expenditure.
But you committed a mistake. You failed in deducting the TDS. So the department view will be why you made a mistake.
Sir, in this sense, if there's no other option, then still the assessee would not be incentivized to make the TDS ever if the deduction is never given to them though.
Okay, any other answer? That as a businessman, how would you defend yourself, or how will you say that injustice is being done to you just because I failed in deducting TDS? Just because I failed in deducting TDS, which though is technically the burden should not be on me. Just because the department placed the burden on me, I failed in deducting TDS. You disallowed my entire 8 lakh rupees, which is genuine. So what remedy do you think should be given to you? What do you think, what remedy should be given to you?
To be allowed to deduct the expenditure if I do make the payment of TDS.
Yes, this is logical, of course. That 8 lakh should not be permanently disallowed in my P&L account. If you are not allowing me to deduct TDS in this year, at least you allow me to deduct in next year when I will give you 80,000 rupees as TDS on behalf of K Limited. So technically next year I will deduct TDS, extra TDS from K Limited and will give to the government. And that is exactly what exception is. So this problem or this loss is having two exceptions. In two cases, this provision doesn't work. That means the deduction will be allowed to you. And first case is exactly what which you have told. I failed. I might have failed by mistake also. But suppose next year I make this 80,000 payment. So where the tax has been deducted. Where the tax has been deducted. In any subsequent year. In any subsequent year, in respect of such sum. In respect of such sum, or if not deducted, so what faults are there? First fault was that I failed in deducting the tax on time, and second fault was I deducted but not deposited. So if I rectify these problems, first is if I deducted, so this first problem is rectified. I deducted in the next year. Or though last year also I deducted, but I didn't deposit it. So this, how I will rectify this problem? Or has been deducted during the previous year, but deposited after the due date of furnishing return of income. Under section 139(1). Last year I deducted, but I not deposited. Not deposited doesn't mean that I will never deposit. You rectify it. Rather than not depositing it permanently, you deposit it. Though that will be after due date, but you deposit it. If you do so, that means your intention is correct, and that 8 lakh rupees, such sum which was disallowed earlier, will be allowed to you. Which was disallowed earlier will be allowed as deduction. While computing PGBP income, can you tell me in which year it will be allowed now? While computing PGBP income, of which year?
In the previous year, the TDS is deposited with the government.
Yes. Because government needs the revenue now. So government says you simply deposit it and we will give you the deduction of entire 8 lakh rupees in the year in which you deposit it, of the previous year in which tax has been deposited or will be deposited. That's it. So this rectifies. And second exception, you leave around 7 to 8 lines blank. I'm starting a numerical now, and the second exception I will tell you later on. Please raise your hand if the concept is clear. You can note it down, and then you raise your hands if now you are getting some sense of this numerical, not numerical, this concept. First note it down and then raise your hands. Note it down carefully and then you raise your hands, because this problem this provision you might find difficult if you are referring from any other material or book. So it's better you note it down. This noting might help you when you study this provision from any book which you have. Okay, now let us discuss a small numerical. So I'm discussing a small numerical from my book, and I will make so many assumptions that this topic will become clear. So let us discuss a small numerical. Page number 6.2. Just listen carefully and then you try to tell me the answer. You have to tell me the answer. Illustration. So what the illustration says that during the previous year 2020-21, that means my previous year, during the previous year 2020-21, what happens is 1 lakh fees for technical service is payable. Payable or paid doesn't matter. Payable or paid doesn't matter. By X, which is a person who is a businessman, to whom? So recipient's name is not given for the time being. Or let me assume that the recipient is P, a resident individual. And this payment is made outside India. So I need both the things, where and to whom. X was required, X is required to deduct tax at source. To deduct tax at source, but he failed. But what happened? But either he failed in deducting or he deducted but failed in depositing. Can you tell me by which date he failed in depositing?
31st July 2021.
31st July 2021. Yes. This expenditure is related to 2021. So one thing is sure that if this expenditure is related to 2021, I failed in deducting it in which year? 2021, of course. If the expenditure is related to 2021, that means I failed in deducting in 2021 because if I'm making the payment in 2021, before making the payment, I should have deducted. So date of payment is not given. So I cannot precisely tell you which date. Suppose this payment is on 4th January to 4th Jan 2021. That means I failed in deducting on 4th Jan 21. Because when you are making the payment at that time itself, you have to deduct. So if the date is not given, it is given that this expenditure is related to 2021. That means I failed in deducting in 2021. 2021 means what? Last date is what? 21 means last date is what? 31st March 21. So I can say confidently that I failed in deducting till when? One thing is sure that till 31st March 21, I have not deducted. Or let us assume otherwise, I deducted. If I say deducted, I am saying what? That till 31st March 21, I deducted, but failed in depositing till which date? Till due date of furnishing return of income. So can you tell me what is this due date logically? If the expense is related to 2021, then due date means that till 31st July 21 I failed in depositing. So any of these two can happen because the consequences are same. Either you failed in deducting before making the payment or you deducted but you failed in depositing. Now that's it. And the question says compute the deduction allowed under section 40 clause A1, or you can say compute the deduction allowed keeping in mind allowed to X while computing PGBP income, keeping in mind the provisions of section 40 clause A subclause 1 into picture. So must be having in your mind. Now this examiner will not tell you that keep in your mind 40 clause A subclause 1 provisions in your account. No, examiner will simply give you the point. You have to remember yourself. Now can you tell me? So now I will start solving it with different assumptions. Okay, before any assumption, can you tell me what is the solution? So I am asking one question now. So the solution I'm asking is can Mr. X debit 1 lakh in the P&L account while computing PGBP income? While computing PGBP income of the previous year 2021, can I debit 1 lakh or not? This is my question. Or first you tell me, is section 40 clause A subclause 1, is this applicable or not? In this example, is this section applicable?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Why? Because any payment, some is payable where? Outside India. Some is payable where? Outside India. Third condition, I was supposed to deduct tax at source, but I was supposed to deduct tax at source. X is required to deduct tax at source, but I failed. So one thing is sure that this section is applicable. If it is applicable, I need to check carefully deduction is allowed or not. Now you tell me, is the deduction allowed?
No, sir.
No,
No,
sir.
sir.
No deduction. In the previous year, how much you will deduct? Nil. So what you checked carefully? First you checked what? So what sequence? You crossed first hurdle by what? That this expenditure is allowed at least as per earlier sections 30 to 35 or 36 or 37. Once you satisfies this section, then you went to the second stage. So in second stage, the hurdle came of section 40 clause A1. You checked all the conditions of 40 clause A1 and you found that no, Since assessee committed a mistake of TDS in the previous year 2021, 1 lakh will not be allowed as deduction. Now I will start. These are hurdles, okay? So now I will start with different assumptions and then you should tell me the answer. Assumption 1. In the one example itself, I will make 7 assumptions. Suppose I deducted tax at source. But the date of deduction is, think carefully, 7th May 21. 7th May 21. I deposited this tax. I deposited this TDS on 30th June 21. Think carefully. 30th June 21. Now, what is the deposit tax deduction year? It is previous year 21-22. What is deposited year? It is previous year 21-22. Expense is related to which year? Can you tell me expense is related to which year?
2021.
So
Yes. My expense is related to 2021. In 2021, I have not deducted. So what is being done here? I deducted in 21-22. So technically, I committed one mistake. This one, first point. If expense was related to 2021, when you have made the payment in 2021, so you haven't deducted while making the payment. So this is indirectly a fault. So I didn't deduct it on time. But when I deposited it, I deposited when? Isn't it within the due date of 2021? I deposited it within the due date of filing return of 2021 to which the expense relates. What 2 points you always need to check for 40 clause A? These two. Carefully. Has I failed in deducting? Yes. I failed in deducting. So if I failed in deducting, technically there is a fault. I'm not supposed to check second point. But let us suppose I want to check second. I deducted but failed in depositing. No, this is also not satisfied. Can you tell me why it is not satisfied? Can you tell me why it is not satisfied?
Sir, because amount is deposited within time period.
No. Satisfied means I'm not covered under this second point. Why?
Because it's not deducted within the time period.
Yes. So, like what I have written, expense of 2021 deposited it within due date. This line is wrong. I should not have written it. Because if you say that you are depositing within due date, at the same time, you must see that it is deducted within the time limit. If this payment is related to 2021, had I deducted in 2021, then this date would have become relevant for me. Had I deducted in 2021, this date would have become relevant for me. But if I didn't deducted in 2021 to which the expense relates, the year to which the expense relates, then this, even if depositing within due date, becomes redundant for me. I have covered a mistake. Oh, I have done a mistake technically. Again, listen, two things are necessary. Either you failed in deducting on time or you deducted on time. Technically, if I complete this line, deducted, this word, it should be deducted on time, but you failed in depositing on time. But in my case, I failed in deducting on time. If I failed in deducting on time, then that means even if I depositing it within due date, it doesn't matter now. So as per 40 clause A, yes, this section is applicable. 40 clause A in my example, 40 clause A is applicable, and 40 clause A subclause 1, because of this I cannot debit anything in previous year 2021, but because of this section itself, next year in previous year 21-22 I can debit, and because of which I can debit, because of which condition, it is my exception number 1. My exception 1 of the same section which will allow me to debit 1 lakh rupees next year, the year in which you deposit it. So the date of deposit is 30th June 21, which is in 2021. So you can debit it in 2021. Is the point a little bit clear? You failed in deducting on time. You deducted, but you didn't deduct on time. So you failed. You cannot debit it in the year to which the expense relates. But can you debit in future? Yes. Then only the exact date of deposit is relevant. On which date you deposit. I deposited on 30th June. I can deduct it in the previous year 21-22. If the concept is little bit clear, please raise your hands. I still cannot expect 100% clarity. It requires concentration. But still, at least if what I am saying is clear, please raise your hands. This is the technical section. This is real text, you can say. 40 clause A subclause 1. So I repeat this assumption. I repeat. Now let me repeat it with the help of exact date. This, so that is only for more clarity. Let us assume that this payment belongs to 7th Jan 2021. So 7th Jan 2021. This is previous year 2021. Technically, I had to deduct tax. I had to deduct tax at source. Can you tell me on which date I had to deduct technically?
7 Jan 2021.
7 Jan 2021. But if I do not deduct it, this is the problem. Or I deducted on 7th Jan 21, but not deposited. Till when? Till due date, which is 31st July 21. Then you cannot debit the expense. This is sure. Either you do not deducted the tax, at source on 7th Jan 21, which you were under compulsion, or you do not deduct it on 7th Jan. At least you deduct it. You do not deduct it on 7th Jan, and that is why you have not deposited also till 31st July. So in this case, the point is, if you have deducted but not deposited, then in these two there will be consequences. What is my consequence 1? On 7th Jan, I was supposed to make a payment. I made the entire payment without deducting tax. I committed consequence 1. This is my consequence 1 technically. And what is consequence 2? Just because you deducted, it does not mean that you will be allowed a deduction. Ultimately, you have to deposit. I deducted on 7th Jan, but I didn't deposit it till due date. So it is my consequence 2. Any of the consequences will make section 40 clause applicable, which will disallow the expense. And this is what exactly happened in my last example, when I assumed that tax is deducted on 7th May 21. Now, date was not given, but at least I knew the year. What was the year? In the last assumption number 1, what was my year? What was my year? 2021. If I say 2021, it is clear that it is from 1st April 2020 till 31st March 21. That means I was under obligation to deduct it till 31st March. So what is my consequence 1 in this example? I was under the obligation to deduct tax at source till 31st March, but I didn't. Deduct it. I deducted when? On 7th May 21. Actually, I deducted on 7th May 21. Now, consequence 2, I cannot check. Consequence 2 can only be checked had I deducted it till 31st March. Consequence 2 says you deducted on time, but I didn't deduct on time. Since I didn't deduct the tax on time, I cannot check consequence 2. In my assumption 1, I was clearly covered under this category that I haven't deducted the tax. So because of this, in the previous year 2021, it was disallowed. So then once it is disallowed in the year in which it is incurred, then you need to check in future only one point, the date of deposit. That's it. So the moment it is disallowed in the year to which it belongs, then in future you simply check deposit date. That's it. When deducted, when not, irrelevant, everything irrelevant. Now what is the deposit date? 7th May 21. This date comes in which year? 21, 22. So in 21, 22, I will be able to claim on the debit side of my P&L account 1 lakh rupees. Please raise your hand now if assumption number 1 is 100% clear. I'll make 7 assumptions, which will clear the concept 100% in your mind now. After these 7 assumptions, you need one revision to be 100% sure about this point. It is technical section, of course. But technical doesn't mean that you cannot do it.
Sir?
Next, yes, Sanjay.
Sir, so if the amount payment is payable, not paid till 31st March 21, but
No. See, don't get confused with the word payable or paid. The reason is that in PGBP, as a businessman, I can prepare the accounts on accrual basis or I can prepare the accounts on cash basis. So even if the payment is payable, I was under the obligation to deduct tax at source. Because if I'm businessman and preparing the account on accrual basis, so if I'm willing to take the deduction on payable basis, then government says TDS is must. You have to deduct tax at source.
yes, sir.
Next assumption. First take this screenshot because this left screen must be clear in your mind. Because on this basis we will complete all these. 7 assumptions. So illustration 1 must be clear in your mind. So I hope or I expect that you have the screenshot of this illustration. Our entire discussion will revolve around this box. I assume that you have taken this screenshot. If not, then no issue. Let us start continuing. Assumption 1 is now 100% clear. When I didn't deduct the tax on time, then it was disallowed in the previous year 2021. It was allowed in the year when I deposited the tax. Assumption 2 now. Very safely we will proceed. Same example is continuing. Now, TDS deducted actually. Think logically. On 7th May 2022 and deposited. Think logically. Deposited when? 30th June 22. Can you tell me that in the previous year 2021 to which the expense relates, how much was allowed as deduction?
Nil.
Nil. Why? Because in the year the expense relates to 2021, and in that year, since I haven't deducted the tax on time, no deduction because of 40 clause A sub clause 1. This section was applicable and this disallowed my expense. But can you tell me the same section allows me to deduct it on which date? In which year?
22-23.
22-23. In that year I can debit 1 lakh rupees on the basis of this date. 7th May 22 irrelevant. I need the date of deposit. Once you cross that year in which you are supposed to deduct tax at source, once you cross that year to which that expense relates, then TDS deduction doesn't make any sense. The date of deduction doesn't make any sense. Date of deposit becomes relevant. So because of this date, 30th June 22, 1 lakh will be allowed, and this is allowed through the concept of exemption, exception number 1 of the same section 40 clause A sub clause 1. Please raise your hand if this assumption 2 is also clear. Next point. Assumption number 3. Assumption number 3. Now I deducted tax on 7th May 22. TDS deducted. Do remember that expense is related to 2021 and tax was not deducted in 2021. These two things must be continuing in my example. Expense is related to 2021. Tax was not deducted in 2021. Now TDS deducted on 7th May 22. And deposited on 30th June 2026. 30th June 2026. Now my question. In the previous year 2021 to which the expense relate, was 1 lakh allowed? No. Because of section 40 clause A1, I failed in deducting the tax. That is why it was not allowed. So then, in which year it is allowed? Can you tell me in which year it is allowed now?
26-27.
Yes, 26-27. Once you cross that year to which the expense relate, TDS deducted date doesn't make any sense. Deposit date becomes relevant. In this year, entire 1 lakh was allowed or will be allowed. because of exception number 1 of section 40 clause A subclause 1. Assumption 4. If you can understand these points, then you will never make any mistake in 40A1. Assumption 4. Think carefully. One thing you must not forget, that my example is going on in which in previous year 2021 I incurred the expense, and in that year itself I did not deduct the tax at source. These things must be clear in your mind. And now this is what I will make a change now. Now let me assume in situation 4 that I deducted TDS, deducted tax, deducted at source, deducted on 7th Jan 21. Think carefully. 7th Jan 21. 7th Jan 21. I deducted it in the same year to which the expense relates. But do you know when I deposited? I deposited on 8th October 21. 8th October 21. 8th October 21. This is in previous year 21-22. Can you think logically that in the previous year 2021 how much was allowed? Nil. Why?
Because it wasn't deposited, the TDS wasn't deposited before the due date of filing returns.
So in why I am disallowed? Because of consequence 2. Am I right? Consequence 2.
Yes, sir.
If you see carefully, I have not failed in deducting on time. I deducted on time, but I failed in depositing. So that was because of consequence number 2, that it was disallowed to me. Because of consequence number 2, under 40 clause A subclause 1, it was disallowed to me in 2021, but it will be allowed in 21-22. Because once it is disallowed in the year to which it belongs, then what is the actual date of deposit? This. So because of exception 1 of the same section, it will be allowed to me in 2021. Sorry, in 21-22. Please raise your hand if this assumption 4 is also clear. The moment you understand this, you will find it very interesting. Yeah, it is little bit technical. It is technical. So you need to listen to this video again if you are having even a slight doubt. After this, I'm 100% sure that no doubt will remain. Next point, assumption number 5. Do remember that expense is related to 2021. Do remember. And I failed in deducting the TDS in 2021. Now what assumption 5 says? 5 says you deducted on time. Assumption 5 says you deducted TDS. You deducted tax at source on time. On time means in the same year, 7th Jan 2021. But do you know when you deposited? You deposited on 8 October 2022. Now, can you tell me in the previous year 2021 was this 1 lakh allowed? No. Why? Because of section 40 clause A1. Consequence 1 was that you failed in deducting. No, I deducted, but I failed in depositing on time. So because of consequence 2, when I failed in depositing on time, it was disallowed, but it will be allowed to me in which previous year? The date of deposit, which is 22-23. I can debit 1 lakh rupees because of the remedy available under exception 1 of the same section. Please raise your hand if assumption number 5 is also clear. Next point. Assumption 6. Do remember, expense relates to 2021. I failed in deducting TDS on time. That means I failed in deducting TDS till 31st March 21. But what assumption number 6 says? That you deducted on time. It says you deducted TDS. There is no failure. Failure was there till assumptions. Till assumption number 3, there was a failure. After assumption 3, I became regular in deducting tax. In assumption 4, I deducted the tax on time. In assumption number 5, I deducted the tax on time. And now here also, I deducted the tax on time. But do you know when I deposited? When I deposited this TDS, I am assuming different dates so as to remove every confusion from your mind. 30th June 2026. Can you tell me that in the previous year 2021 to which the expense relate, what was the deduction? Nil. Because though you deducted on time, but you didn't deposit it. So it was nil. 40A1 says nil, no deduction. But, and because of which consequence? Consequence 2. Because you deducted on time, you failed in depositing. But it will be allowed as deduction in the previous year 2000. Can you tell me in which previous year it will be allowed?
26, 27.
20? Which year? Is it right?
26, 27.
Yes. It is allowed in 26, 27. 1 lakh is allowed because of exception 1 of this section. Now some of you might think when you read at your home that this year should be 25, 26. Some of you might think this as 25, 26, but that confusion I will explain to you later on. It will not be 25, 26. It is 26, 27. In case you are confident in 26, 27, that is fine. But the moment you start reading more confusion comes. When there is more confusion, it is an indication that you are learning something really. When there is no confusion, technically there is no learning then. More or higher studies gives you higher points. More confusion. The confusion comes. Doubts come only when you are deep into that concept. Those who don't know the concept, they will not be having any doubt. So if you have understood it carefully, if not right now, maybe later on, you will ask a question to yourself that why it is not 25, 26. It will not be 25, 26, but I will tell you this later on if you will get such question in your mind. Assumption number 7, last assumption. Now see, do remember the expense is still same, previous year 2021. You deducted TDS on time 7 Jan 21 in the same year. You deposited on 31st July 21. You deposited on 31st July 21. Can you tell me in the previous year how much will be the deduction? No, full amount will be allowed to me as deduction. 1 lakh. There will be no disallowance. I will pass the test of 40A1 in this assumption. I will pass this test. Why? Because I deducted and also deposited it on time. So the expense will be allowed as deduction in the same year to which it belongs. So there is no disallowance. I will pass the test of 40A1. So no consequence is there. In assumption 6, there was second consequence. In assumption 5, there was second consequence. In assumption number 4, there was second consequence. In earlier points, there was consequence 1. Because of first consequence, I didn't deduct it on time. In assumption 2 also there was second consequence. So with these assumptions, I told you, or I gave you the clarity about the consequence also because of which you are applying the provisions. First assumption also there was 7 by 21. There was consequence 1. So out of these 6 assumptions, in first 3 there was consequence 1. Fourth, fifth, and sixth consequence 2 applicability, and seventh no consequence. So in this example, I gave you 7 different assumptions just to make sure that there is no confusion when you will study it again. Right now there can be slight confusion because it is a technical section that I have said to you earlier also. It is technical. There can be a confusion, but the moment you read it silently and with 100% dedication, all confusion will be clear in your mind, which are related to section 40 clause A subclause 1. Please raise your hand if what I have discussed is clear. Still the discussion is not over. Please raise your hand if the point is clear. Now still I'm continuing with 40A. I will take some 10 to 15 minutes more. So right now, if you carefully notice what I have covered, all these 7 assumptions are related to whom? When the pair is X. And who was the recipient? In all these 7 assumptions, who was the recipient?
P.
P, who is a resident individual. So technically, let me simplify this. Let me present it with the help of a table. We have not yet covered 40A1. Let me present it with the help of a table. And you will notice something very interesting now. This is my example number 1. Example number 1. Just see what will happen. Where the payment is made? Can you tell me where the payment is made? In this example. Outside India. If you notice carefully in this example, the payment is made outside India. ये मैंने लिखा था या नहीं लिखा था? Yes. Payment was made outside India. To whom it was made? You must notice that what we have been doing. To whom the payment was made? P, a resident individual. Whether section 40A1 was applicable? Yes. It was applicable, yes. And because of this applicability, in my original example, without any assumption, how much was allowed? How much is the deduction allowed? In the previous year, 2021. So in my original example, this was my original example. How much was Original example means assumption number 1. So my original example, you mean to say assumption 1. In my original example, where my assumption number 1 was there, so where my assumption number 1 was there, how much was the deduction allowed? Nil. Okay, this was the concept. Assumption 1, deduction allowed was nil. So now let us assume that that question is over. Though I told you 7 assumptions, but those all 7 were related to my this main example, where the same P was there. So I told you 7 assumptions. But let me assume with assumption number 1. Ignore all the 7 assumptions. Assumption number 1 is the only main assumption for the time being. Now what I will do now? Let me assume that now this recipient is Q, a non-resident individual. Now let me assume that the recipient is Q, a non-resident individual. Now if the payment is made in the same example, assumption number 1 is the foundation. What is assumption number 1? Expense relate to previous year. What is assumption number 1? Expense is related to previous year 2021. I did not deduct on time. I did not deduct on time. And since I did not deduct on time, consequence 2 is not necessary to be checked, because consequence 2 says when you deducted on time but you failed in depositing. But since I did not deduct on time, or let us assume I deducted on time but I failed. Failed in depositing on time, depositing till due date. So this was my assumption number 1, and because of this assumption I disallowed in the previous year 2021. I disallowed. Do you remember this assumption 1? If you have noted down in your copies, please raise your hand if you remember this point. That expense was related to 2021. What was my assumption 1? I did not deducted on time, or even if let us assume that deducted, but I did not deposit on time. This was assumption number 1, and I disallowed the expenditure in 2021. Ignore all other assumptions. Almost 40A is over, almost. But I now want to change the recipients and see what will happen. I want to change the recipients now. Yes?
Sir, in assumption 1, the amount deposited on 30 June 2021.
Yeah, but it was not deducted on time, na? मतलब previous year 2021 में तो deposit deduct नहीं हुआ ना?
Yes, sir. So why you write failed in depositing till due date?
I am writing this because this is not single condition failed. This is combined condition. First deduction must be on time, and then deposit also must be on time. But in this case, you are reading only 50% portion. You are saying that I have not failed in depositing till due date, but you are not reading this line. Had you deducted on time? Answer is no. So I am not fulfilling this 50% portion now of consequence 2. Point clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Point clear or not? बोलो भाई, समझ आया नहीं आया point?
Yes, sir.
Deducted on time means had I deducted till 31st March 21, in reality In my assumption 1, what is the deduction date? I deducted tax when? On 7th May 21. So I didn't deduct on time. So that is why I will not write failed in deposit. When you didn't deduct on time, then there is no benefit in checking whether you have deposited on time or not. Okay, so that assumption 1 I will change for different categories. Now see, suppose the recipient is Q, a resident individual, payment is still outside India. Will the answer change? Answer is no, answer will remain same. Still the applicable condition remains same, deduction will be nil. Because when the payment is made outside India, it does not matter who is this recipient. Clear? Same answer will come. Third, suppose the payment is made outside India and the recipient is P Limited, a resident company. Will the answer change? No. Same answer will go. Whatever answer you have computed in my first assumption, same answer will continue. Because payment is made outside India, it does not matter who the recipient is. Similarly, payment made outside India. Now the recipient is Q Limited, a non-resident foreign company. Will the answer change?
No.
Will the answer change?
No.
No. Still the section will be applicable, deduction will be nil. Why? Because whenever the payment is made outside India, it does not matter who the recipient is. I'm preparing this table just to make clear this point in your mind. That whenever the payment is made outside India, it does not matter who the recipient is. You will apply the provisions. You can assume any example. When the payment is made outside India, the recipient can be individual resident, individual non-resident, company resident, company non-resident. Answer will not change. Effect on the businessman will be same. If the payment is made in India, and now let me suppose the person is R Limited, a resident foreign company, or now I'm sharing a screenshot with you. First where I have made different 8 possible combinations. You will not be able to understand these 8 combinations till you become 100% confident in this example which I have discussed with you. So now I'm stopping myself in discussing these further situations. I'm directly sharing the screenshot with you. Read this 40 clause A subclause 1 yourself. All these 7 assumptions where P, a resident individual, was there. Once you will understand all these assumptions confidently, only then you will be able to understand this table. So please take a screenshot of this table. It is the technical point, and I think this is the first or most technical point which we have come across since when we have started income tax for our level. So please take the screenshot of this page from my book. This is what I have discussed with you. I was going to discuss this table, but I think I should stop now. Please take this screenshot. Do you know what I have discussed? I discussed only this first situation. I discussed with you only first situation. All these assumptions are related to this first situation. These situation 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These are altogether a different question where I changed the recipient. So take the screenshot of this page. Have you taken? Unmute and reply if you have taken the screenshot.
Yes.
Okay. Take other screenshots also. If you don't have my book, then it is better that you read it from here. These are those assumptions which I have discussed with you. Take the screenshot of this point. If you have taken it, please tell me. I will show you next page also. If you have taken this screenshot, please raise your hand. I will show you next page also. Shall I proceed?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Next page. You take this screenshot also. Let me show you. You take it till. Is the font size visible? Or shall I increase it?
Sorry, increase it a little bit.
Okay. Then it will go in two windows. So take the screenshot till this page, then I will show you. I will scroll it down. First to take the screenshot. It will cover assumption number 3, 4, 5. Whatever I have discussed, I have written in such a way that you can read it yourself. Shall I proceed?
Yes, sir.
Now remaining these two assumptions. After this, my next section will start, which we will discuss later on. Please take the screenshot. Please raise your hand if you have taken the screenshot. Okay, now see what we have covered. I just want to tell you that what we have covered. I have covered only these 7 assumptions are related to only the recipient who was P. So that was only situation number 1. This is what I have covered only. When P was the recipient who is a resident, and I simply changed the dates so that you become confident in learning the concept in which year the amount is allowed as deduction. After this, I made total 8 situations where I change either the recipient status, as you can see, or outside India, in India. I changed this, and then I wanted to show you what will be the effect. But you cannot understand these points till you become confident in your first situation. So these points you cannot understand. I also cannot make you understand till you have 100% clarity on the remaining all the 7 assumptions with you. When you will be 100% sure about section 40 clause A subclause 1A, then I will teach you these different situations, that when I change the recipient status or when I change when the payment is made, what effect will be there in my calculation. That is of course part of our course. It doesn't mean that it is beyond the purview of semester 3. It is a part of our course, but at one stage of 40 clause A, subclause 1, you must be clear in all the points which I have discussed with you today. Once you are clear in this, then I will move forward and we'll discuss the remaining provisions of the same section. So that's all from my side. The session was a little bit technical, but if the section itself is technical, then there is no choice. We have to learn it or we have to read it alone. That's all from my side. So let us wind up this session. So goodbye for now. I will of course proceed day after tomorrow with remaining concepts, but I strongly advise you, if there is any slight doubt, read this 40 clause A, subclause 1 in detail, and then I'm sure that when you will learn it, you will find it very interesting. That's all. Goodbye for now.